Thank you. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm used to letting my films kind of do the talking for me, but it wouldn't be very TEDx of me to stay in my comfort zone. So today I'm not going to show you clips of my film. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my life and why I make films. In the summer of 1966, I was 5 years old, and my grandfather took me on a train trip from our hometown of Portland, Oregon, to his birthplace of Flint, Michigan. And my memories of that trip are vague and impressionistic. I remember the reassuring rocking rhythm of the train and the wonder of seeing the sky, the moonlit sky, through the transparent dome of our sleeper car. But there's one memory that stands out from that trip, and in fact, it shaped my life. My grandfather was a kind-hearted man. He never missed a chance to take me and my friends to the circus. He knew the names not only of all of his neighbors, but of waitresses, letter carriers, grocery store clerks, and bus drivers. He was a house painter by trade. He had a strong work ethic, a powerful love of nature, and a deep sense of community. He was also an alcoholic of the most heartbreaking and frustrating variety, a binge drinker. My grandpa could go days, weeks, even months without a drink, but once he took that first drink, he couldn't stop. Once when I was 12, my mom and I were driving, and we saw my grandfather stumbling drunk down the street. And I asked my mom, should we stop and pick him up? And she sadly shook her head no and kept on driving. So I'm 5, and I'm on that train with my grandpa, and we're having a pretty great time. And somewhere around Helena, Montana, he takes that first drink. And I wake up the third day of our trip to find my grandfather beside me, missing one crucial possession, his dentures. Now, it wasn't new to me to see my grandfather without his dentures. As a joke, he would wait till I wasn't looking, take his dentures out, tap me on the shoulder, and then when I turned around, he would say, "See what happens if you don't brush your teeth?" But returning home to Flint, Michigan, toothless, to say goodbye to his dying father was no joke to my grandfather. And so he solemnly took a $5 bill from his wallet, and he instructed me to gather all the kids from the train and tell them that there would be a $5 reward for whoever found his dentures, upper and lower. And so within minutes, kids were frantically searching through ashtrays, underneath seats, through luggage compartments, trying to find my grandfather's choppers, as he called them. And finally, a little boy from Idaho found them in the sink of the men's room closest to the bar. And there was much applause and laughter as my grandfather gave the boy from Idaho the $5, took his dentures and put them in his mouth and smiled a big grin. But I noticed that the people on the train treated me and my grandfather differently after that. And I think what my films are about is that search for my grandfather's dentures. The humanizing narrative that bridges the gap between us and them and arrives at we. My mom was a bartender and my dad a liquor salesman. Do you sense a trend here? And my mom worked from 3 to 11, and so after school I would walk to a babysitter's house where I was to stay until about 6 when my dad would get off work and supposedly pick me up. But my dad didn't usually pick me up by 6 or 7 or 8. He'd oftentimes pick me up at 9, and he'd be so drunk that I'd have to sit on his lap and steer the car on the drive home because he couldn't. In the weekends, he would take me to his brother's house. My Uncle Stan was what people then called a wino. His wife, my Aunt Bernice, used to watch the television, convinced that it was watching her, and she would talk back to it. No one talked much about Aunt Bernice except to say that she was nervous. My Uncle Stan and my dad would drop my cousin Paul and I off at a movie theater, any movie theater, so that they could go drink. And it didn't matter what film was playing or what the starting times were. Paul was 9 and I was 7, and we saw 2001: A Space Odyssey 8 times. I've been very lucky in my life to have some great teachers. In the December of 1975, at Fremont Junior High School, in my 8th grade English class, Mr. Greenfield assigned us to write down everything we wanted for Christmas. And we greedily and happily complied, writing page after page of toys, albums, they had albums back then, clothes, anything we wanted. And then he told us to set that list aside, and he showed us a film, a 17-minute documentary called A Day in the Life of Bonnie Consolo. The film follows Bonnie Consolo, a housewife and mother in suburban Florida, as she goes about her day. It shows her getting her kids ready for school, taking them to school, making meals, shopping, paying bills, taking a kid to the doctor, all the 101 things we all do to keep a family running. Nothing remarkable, except for one fact. Bonnie Consolo had no arms. And so after the film, Mr. Greenfield turned the lights on, and he asked if anyone in the class would care to share their Christmas wish list with the class. And no one said a word. Because we knew from what we had just seen that everything we really needed was deep within us already, and if Bonnie Consolo could access that, then so could we. And I was struck by how the filmmaker, Barry Spinello, was able to make everyone in our class identify with Bonnie Consolo. And I was also thunderstruck by the power of the silence after Mr. Greenfield's question, does anyone care to share their Christmas wish list with the class? Because I could tell that in that silence, we were all growing a little bit. That our definition of what it meant to be human was a little bit broader and a little bit more beautiful than it had been just 18 minutes before. I was the first member of my family to go to college, and I put myself through school by taking out student loans, a lot of student loans, working work-study jobs, and then working in a salmon cannery in Cordova, Alaska in the summertime. And after I'd exhausted all the video production classes at Lewis and Clark College, my professor, Stuart Kaplan, gave me a card that changed my life. In that card, he said that he believed I had the drive and talent to be a filmmaker, and he gave me a gift certificate to a class at the Northwest Film Center. And in that class, I made a short film about my grandpa and his cronies who would meet for breakfast at the cafeteria at Newberry's in Lloyd Center. And using that film as my portfolio piece, I was accepted to Columbia University's MFA program in directing and screenwriting. And at Columbia, I made 2 thesis films. Lucy's Room, which tells the story of a young couple dealing with the death of their baby, and Coming Back, Giving Back, about Earl the Goat Manigault, a legendary Harlem schoolyard basketball player, and his work with Harlem Kids. I returned to Portland after film school, and I did several projects with the Northwest Film Center that had me putting a camera in the hands of kids on probation, homeless teens, newly recovering addicts, hard-hit people who had hard-hitting stories to share. And those projects taught me so much about the transformative power of art. And they gave me permission, I felt, in my personal films to ask people if I might follow them so that an audience could better understand what they were going through and by extension, better understand themselves. And in that spirit, I made 3 feature-length cinema verite films. To Pay My Way with Stories, which follows an intensive 10-week free writing program for low-income people. Writing Myself, about the wonderful work of PlayWrite Inc., and Finding Normal, in which I followed long-term heroin or crack addicts as they left prison or detox and tried to rebuild their life with the help of a recovery mentor. I've been very lucky that my films have been broadcast. They've been shown in theaters nationally and even internationally. They've won awards. They've been selected for film festivals. But what I'm most proud about is that Finding Normal is the only film to ever be shown to inmates in solitary confinement at Oregon State Penitentiary, and not, I might add, as a punishment. My most recent film is Alien Boy, and it tells the story of James Chasse, a man with schizophrenia who died in the custody of Portland police in 2006. I knew that the terrible and brutal way in which Jim died, his ribs were broken in 26 places, and the controversy surrounding the case would allow me to share Jim's story, his happy early childhood, his troubling adolescence, his intense and rewarding involvement in the early punk scene in Portland, his first love, the heartbreaking teenage onset of his mental illness, the loss of relationships, his institutionalization at age 18. You know, it isn't often that we see a film in which the main character has schizophrenia, and it's been a real privilege of me to share that film with an audience. Jim lived a life of resilience and heart. He was dealt a hard hand, and he played it well, and his story deserves to be told. After my films, thank you. After my films, my mom usually comes up and tells me two things. One, I'm proud of you. And then two, she'll say, but why are your films so depressing? And I think what she means by that is that my films aren't about people that we usually see in films. Because I believe by fully exploring the dark fringes, we can find the most light. By truly looking through the grit, we can find the grace. And if we look hard enough through the muck and grime of the sink in the men's room nearest the bar, we can find Grandpa's dentures. Thank you.